If you ever get offered a job at a place like this, say no. I should have known the moment I saw the ad. Live-in help needed, excellent pay, room and board included, remote location. That something was off. But desperation has a way of making you ignore your instincts. I'd lost my last job 2 months ago, and the bills were piling up. When the farmhouse owners called me back within an hour of my application, I convinced myself it was just luck. Maybe they were just lonely, or maybe no one else wanted to work this far from civilization. The drive out was endless, a single-lane road winding through empty fields and dense woods. My phone lost signal halfway there. By the time I reached the property, dusk was settling in, painting the sky in bruised purples and reds. The farmhouse stood alone at the end of a gravel drive, its windows glowing faintly against the encroaching dark. The air was thick with the scent of earth and something older, something I couldn't name. As I stepped out of my car, the silence pressed in. No distant traffic, no neighbors, just the wind and the creak of the porch swing. The owners, Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove, greeted me with polite smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. They looked tired, wary, as if they hadn't slept well in years. After a quick tour, Mrs. Hargrove paused at the kitchen table, her hand resting on a folded piece of paper. "Before you settle in," she said quietly, "there are a few important rules you need to follow after dark." Her voice was steady, but her eyes flicked to the windows, as if she was afraid of what might be listening. Mr. Hargrove sat across from me at the kitchen table, his hands folded tightly, knuckles pale. Mrs. Hargrove slid the paper toward me, her fingers trembling just enough for me to notice. I glanced down at the list, expecting chores or maybe a curfew, but what I read made my skin prickle. After sunset, lock every door and window. Double-check the cellar. Do not look out the east window between midnight and 3 a.m., no matter what you hear. If you hear knocking at the back door, ignore it. Do not answer, do not speak. If the wind chimes on the porch, stop moving. Turn off all lights and wait in silence until they start again. Never go into the barn after dark. If you see lights inside, stay away. If you find muddy footprints in the hallway, follow them only if they lead outside. If they lead deeper into the house, call us immediately. At dawn, unlock the doors and open the curtains. Never before. I looked up, half expecting a smile, a wink, some sign that this was a joke. Instead, Mr. Hargrove's eyes met mine, steady and grave. "We know it sounds strange," he said, "but these rules are for your safety. Ours too." Mrs. Hargrove nodded, her lips pressed tight. "We've had help before. Some didn't listen. They didn't last long." A chill ran through me, but I tried to laugh it off. Is this some kind of local tradition? Like hazing for new hires? Mr. Hargrove shook his head. "You'll understand soon enough. Just follow the rules. No exceptions." The kitchen felt colder, the overhead light too harsh against the gathering dark outside. I glanced at the clock. Sunset was minutes away. Mrs. Hargrove stood, smoothing her skirt with nervous hands. "We'll be in our room after dark. If you need anything, call us, but don't leave your room unless it's an emergency." She hesitated, then added, "And if you hear us calling from outside after midnight, don't open the door. We'll never be outside after dark." The normalcy of the farmhouse, the ticking clock, the smell of baking bread, the faded family photos on the wall, clashed with the bizarre, almost superstitious list in my hands. I wanted to ask more, to press for explanations, but the Hargroves' faces told me I wouldn't get any. Not tonight. I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket, trying to ignore the way my heart thudded in my chest. Maybe it was all just a scare tactic, a way to keep me on my toes. But as the last light faded from the sky and the house settled into uneasy silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just agreed to something far more dangerous than a simple job. My first shift was about to begin, and the rules were already echoing in my mind. I spent the first hour after sunset pacing the farmhouse, checking and rechecking every lock. The doors were thick, old wood, the kind that groaned when you turned the key. I pressed my palm to each window, feeling the chill seep through the glass. The cellar door was the last to be checked, its iron latch stiff with age. I made sure it was secure, then returned to the kitchen, the list of rules burning a hole in my pocket. The house was quiet, but not the peaceful kind of quiet I'd hoped for. It was the kind that made every sound stand out. The tick of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant creak of settling beams. I tried to distract myself by tidying up, wiping down the counters and stacking dishes, but my eyes kept drifting to the east window. It looked out over a field that stretched to the tree line, the grass silvered by moonlight. I caught myself glancing at it every few minutes, half expecting to see something moving out there. At midnight, I made tea and sat at the kitchen table, the rule about the east window echoing in my mind. I told myself it was just a precaution, maybe a way to keep me from getting spooked by wildlife or wandering drunks. Still, I avoided looking in that direction, focusing instead on the steam curling from my mug. Around 1, the wind picked up, rattling the porch swing and sending the wind chimes into a frantic dance. I watched their shadows flicker across the wall, oddly hypnotized. The lights in the house seemed too bright, so I dimmed them, telling myself it was to save electricity. The air felt heavier, as if the house itself was holding its breath. A little after 2, I heard a soft thump from the hallway. My heart jumped, but I forced myself to investigate. I found nothing, no footprints, no open doors, just the faint smell of earth, like someone had tracked in mud. I checked the list again, my finger tracing the line about muddy footprints. Only follow them if they lead outside. I knelt and ran my hand over the floorboards, but they were clean. Maybe I'd imagined it. Back in the kitchen, I tried to read, but every creak and groan of the house set my nerves on edge. I kept glancing at the clock, counting down the hours until dawn. The wind chimes suddenly stopped, the silence so abrupt it made me freeze. I remembered the rule: turn off all lights and wait in silence. My hand hovered over the switch, but before I could move, the chimes started again, tinkling softly as if nothing had happened. I let out a shaky breath, realizing how close I'd come to breaking a rule. The urge to laugh at myself was strong, but it died in my throat. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching, waiting for me to slip up. The rest of the night passed in a tense, uneasy vigil, every minute stretching longer than the last. When the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, I felt a wave of relief so strong it nearly brought me to tears. I unlocked the doors and opened the curtains, just as the rules said, and tried to convince myself that it had all been in my head. But deep down, I knew the real test was only just beginning. The next day, I tried to laugh off my nerves. I told myself it was just the isolation, the unfamiliar creaks of an old house, the way the wind seemed to find every crack in the walls. But as dusk approached, I found myself checking the locks earlier, moving with a sense of urgency I couldn't explain. The Hargroves were quiet at dinner, exchanging glances over their plates. When Mrs. Hargrove excused herself early, Mr. Hargrove lingered, his eyes fixed on the window. "Remember the rules," he said, voice low. "Especially tonight. The weather's changing." After they retreated to their room, I made my rounds, double-checking every door and window. The wind was stronger than the night before, howling around the corners of the house and making the trees outside sway like dancers in a storm. I tried to distract myself with chores, but my mind kept drifting back to the list in my pocket. It was just after midnight when the knocking started. At first, I thought it was the wind rattling a loose shutter, but then it came again, 3 slow, deliberate knocks at the back door. My heart hammered in my chest. I froze, remembering the rule. If you hear knocking at the back door, ignore it. Do not answer, do not speak. But the knocking continued, louder this time, insistent. I crept down the hallway, every step echoing in the silence. The back door was just visible at the end, a sliver of moonlight shining through the glass. I could see a shadow on the other side, tall and thin, unmoving. My breath caught in my throat. Then a voice, soft and pleading, drifted through the door. "Please, let me in. It's so cold out here." It sounded almost familiar, like a friend I hadn't seen in years. I took a step closer, my hand reaching for the doorknob before I could stop myself. The urge to help, to open the door and let the stranger in, was overwhelming. I pressed my palm against the wood, feeling the chill seep through. "Please," the voice whispered again, closer now, as if the speaker's lips were pressed to the crack. "I'm lost. I just need a place to rest." My fingers curled around the knob, and for a moment, I forgot the rules, forgot the warnings, forgot everything except the desperate need in that voice. A sudden gust of wind rattled the window, snapping me back to reality. I jerked my hand away, stumbling backward. The knocking stopped. Silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. I waited, barely breathing, as the shadow on the other side of the door seemed to stretch, growing taller, darker, until it filled the glass. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the shadow vanished. The air in the hallway grew colder, and I heard a faint scratching, like fingernails on wood, moving away from the door and down the wall. I stood rooted to the spot, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. When I finally found the courage to move, I checked the door. The glass was fogged, as if someone had been breathing on it from the outside. There were no footprints, no sign that anyone had ever been there. But the cold lingered, a reminder that something had come calling, and I had almost let it in. I realized then that the rules weren't just for show, they were the only thing keeping us alive. The urge to dismiss them as superstition was gone, replaced by a bone-deep fear I couldn't shake. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the kitchen, every light on, the list of rules clutched in my hand. I didn't sleep. I didn't dare. When dawn finally broke, I unlocked the doors and opened the curtains with shaking hands, grateful to see the sun rise over the fields. From that moment on, I knew I couldn't afford to doubt the Hargroves or their rules. Whatever haunted this farmhouse was real, and it was waiting for me to make a mistake. The days blurred together after that night. I moved through my chores with a new sense of vigilance, always glancing over my shoulder, always listening for sounds that didn't belong. The Hargroves grew more withdrawn, their faces drawn and pale. I noticed how they avoided certain rooms after dark, how they never lingered near the east window, how they flinched at the sound of the wind chimes. The farmhouse felt less like a home and more like a fortress, every rule a brick in the wall between us and whatever waited outside. It wasn't long before I learned I wasn't the only one struggling. One afternoon, as I was stacking firewood, I found Mrs. Hargrove in the garden, her hands trembling as she pulled weeds. She looked up, her eyes rimmed red. "We had a girl here last spring," she said quietly, voice barely above a whisper. "She was young and thought we were just superstitious old fools. She laughed at the rules. The first week, she left the cellar door unlatched. The next morning, we found muddy footprints all through the house. She followed them into the parlor. We never saw her again. Not really. Sometimes, late at night, I hear her voice in the walls. That night, the wind chimes stopped again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I turned off every light and sat in the dark, heart pounding, counting the seconds. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faintest scrape of something moving across the porch. I pressed my back against the wall, clutching the list of rules, willing the chimes to start again. When they finally did, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The next day, Mr. Hargrove asked me to help him in the barn. We finished before sunset, but as we were leaving, I saw a faint glow through the cracks in the boards. "Don't look," he hissed, grabbing my arm. "Don't even think about it." We hurried back to the house, and I didn't ask questions. That night, I heard footsteps crunching in the gravel outside, circling the barn, then the house. I peeked through the curtains and saw nothing but darkness, but the footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, until dawn. A week later, I woke to the sound of knocking, this time at the front door. I froze, remembering the rule about the back door, but nothing about the front. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. I crept down the stairs, every step a test of my resolve. Through the peephole, I saw a man in muddy overalls, his face hidden in shadow. "Let me in," he called, voice flat and hollow. "I used to live here. I just want to come home." I backed away, heart racing, and the knocking stopped. When I checked again, he was gone, but muddy footprints led from the porch to the edge of the woods. The Hargroves grew more anxious with each passing night. I caught them whispering in the hallway, their voices tense. One evening, Mrs. Hargrove pressed a small silver bell into my hand. "If you ever feel like you're being watched, ring this. It won't stop them, but it might buy you time." I tucked it into my pocket, grateful for anything that might help. The supernatural threat became bolder. Shadows moved in the corners of my vision. I heard voices calling my name from the fields, laughter echoing from the barn. Once, I found the cellar door ajar, even though I knew I'd locked it. I slammed it shut, bolting it tight, and spent the rest of the night listening to something scratching at the other side. I started to wonder if anyone ever really leaves this place alive. The rules felt less like guidelines and more like a lifeline, the only thing standing between me and whatever haunted the farmhouse. I became obsessed with following them, checking and rechecking every lock, every window, every door. I memorized the list, reciting it under my breath like a prayer. But fear wasn't the only thing growing inside me. I felt a fierce determination take root, a need to survive, to protect the Hargroves, to make it through the darkness. I watched over the house each night, bell in hand, eyes sharp for any sign of danger. I knew the rules could be broken in a moment of weakness, a single lapse in judgment, and I refused to let that happen. Not to me, not to anyone else. The farmhouse was a battleground, and I was done being afraid. It happened on a night when the air felt wrong, heavy and electric, as if a storm was waiting just beyond the horizon. The sky was a bruised purple, clouds hanging low over the fields. I went through my routine with extra care, checking every lock, every window, every latch on the cellar and barn. The Hargroves were tense, their movements sharp and hurried. At dinner, Mr. Hargrove barely touched his food, and Mrs. Hargrove kept glancing at the clock. When the sun dipped below the trees, they retreated to their room, leaving me alone with the silence. I tried to distract myself with a book, but the words blurred on the page. The wind chimes rattled on the porch, their song frantic and uneven. I kept the silver bell close, its weight a small comfort in my pocket. Midnight crept closer, and with it, a sense of dread I couldn't shake. I found myself staring at the east window, the one I was never supposed to look through after midnight. The moonlight spilled across the floor, painting the room in ghostly silver. Then, a scream shattered the quiet. It came from outside, high and desperate, echoing across the fields. I froze, heart pounding, every muscle tensed. Another scream followed, closer this time, and then a frantic pounding at the front door. "Help me!" A voice cried, raw with terror. "Please, let me in. They're coming." It sounded like a young woman, her words slurred with panic. I remembered the rules: never answer the door at night, never speak to the voices outside. But the screams grew louder, more desperate, and I felt my resolve slipping. I crept to the door, peering through the peephole. A girl stood on the porch, barefoot and shivering, her dress torn and muddy. Her eyes were wide with fear, her face streaked with tears. "Please," she sobbed, pounding on the door. "They're right behind me. Don't let them get me." My hand hovered over the lock, torn between the rules and the instinct to help. I could see movement in the darkness behind her, shadows shifting, something crawling through the grass. I hesitated, the rules warring with my conscience. The girl's eyes met mine through the glass, and for a moment, I saw something flicker in their depths, something ancient and hungry. My breath caught. I stepped back, but it was too late. The door rattled violently, the wood groaning under the force. The girl's voice twisted, deepening into a guttural snarl. "Let me in," she hissed, her face contorting, mouth stretching impossibly wide. "You broke the rule. Now you're mine." The lights flickered and died, plunging the house into darkness. The wind chimes outside and falls silent. I fumbled for the silver bell, ringing it with shaking hands. The sound was thin, barely audible over the pounding at the door. Shadows seeped through the cracks, crawling across the floor like spilled ink. I stumbled backward, clutching the list of rules, my mind racing. I remembered the cellar. If the door was open, the thing could get inside. I sprinted down the hallway, the shadows nipping at my heels. The cellar door was ajar, swinging gently on its hinges. I slammed it shut, bolting it tight, just as something heavy crashed against the other side. The house shook, dust raining from the ceiling. I pressed my back to the door, breath coming in ragged gasps. The pounding at the front door stopped. Silence fell, thick and suffocating. Then, footsteps echoed in the hallway, slow, deliberate, coming closer. I pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering. The footsteps paused outside the kitchen, and I heard the girl's voice again, soft and mocking. "You can't hide. You let me in. The rules are broken." I forced myself to think. The rules were my only hope. I remembered the one about the wind chimes. If they stopped, turn off all lights and wait in silence. The house was already dark, but I held my breath, willing myself to be still. The footsteps moved past, fading into the distance. I waited, counting the seconds, the bell clutched in my fist. A sudden crash shattered the silence. The east window exploded inward, glass spraying across the floor. The girl, no, the thing, crawled through the opening, its limbs too long, its eyes black and empty. It grinned, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. "You broke the rule," it whispered, voice echoing in my head. "Now you belong to us." I scrambled backward, searching for anything to defend myself. My hand closed around the silver bell. I rang it again, the sound piercing the darkness. The creature recoiled, hissing, its form flickering like a candle flame. I remembered the last rule. At dawn, unlock the doors and open the curtains. Never before. I lunged for the curtains, yanking them open. The first pale light of morning spilled into the room, washing over the creature. It shrieked, its body twisting and writhing, before dissolving into shadow. I collapsed to the floor, shaking, the bell still ringing in my hand. The sun rose slowly, painting the farmhouse in gold. I saw what happens when the rules are ignored. I'll never forget it. The house was scarred, broken glass, deep scratches in the wood, the lingering chill of something unnatural. I was changed, too. The fear was still there, but now it was sharpened by knowledge. The threat wasn't over. The rules had saved me, but only just. And I knew, as I swept up the glass and locked the doors for another night, that the thing outside was waiting for me to slip again. The farmhouse felt different in the morning light, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I moved through the rooms in a daze, sweeping up shards of glass, wiping away muddy streaks, and checking every lock twice. My hands shook, and every sound made me flinch. The memory of the thing's voice, the way it twisted the girl's face into something monstrous, haunted me with every step. I kept the silver bell in my pocket, its faint chime a small comfort as I tried to convince myself that daylight meant safety. The Hargroves found me in the kitchen, staring at the east window. Mr. Hargrove's face was pale, his eyes shadowed with worry. Mrs. Hargrove set a mug of tea in front of me and sat down, her hands folded tightly. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Mr. Hargrove cleared his throat. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked quietly. I nodded, unable to find my voice. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "We should have told you more, but most people don't believe it until it's too late. The rules aren't just for us. They're for everyone who's ever lived on this land." Mrs. Hargrove's voice was soft, but steady. "This place is old. Older than the farmhouse, older than the fields. There's something here, something that waits in the dark, looking for a way in. The rules keep it out, or at least keep it at bay. But if even one is broken, it finds a crack to slip through." I stared at them, the weight of their words settling over me like a shroud. "What is it?" I whispered. Mr. Hargrove shook his head. "We don't know. My grandfather called it the hunger. Others called it the shadow. It takes different forms, uses different voices. It knows your fears, your memories. It's patient. It waits for someone to slip, to open a door, to look when they shouldn't." Mrs. Hargrove reached across the table, her hand warm on mine. "We've lost people. Family, friends, workers. Some vanished. Some changed. That's why the rules are so strict. They're not superstitions. They're surviving." I felt a cold knot in my stomach, the realization settling in that I'd come within a breath of joining those lost to the darkness. The rest of the day passed in uneasy silence. I replayed the night's events over and over, searching for what I could have done differently. The rules had saved me, but only because I'd remembered them at the last possible moment. I wondered how many others had been less lucky, how many had ignored the warnings and paid the price. As dusk approached, I found myself checking the locks again, moving through the house with a new sense of purpose. The fear was still there, but it was tempered by understanding. The rules weren't just for me, they were for everyone. For the Hargroves, for the people who came before, for anyone who might come after. I knew now that the danger was never truly gone. It was always waiting, just beyond the edge of the light, hungry for another chance. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, I promised myself I wouldn't let it win. I stayed on at the farmhouse, though every instinct told me to run. The Hargroves needed me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that leaving would only trade one kind of fear for another. I became part of the daily rhythm, mending fences, tending the garden, checking locks and latches with a diligence that bordered on obsession. The rules were no longer just a list in my pocket. They were etched into my bones, guiding every action after sunset. I watched the sky for signs, listened for the wind chimes, and never, ever looked out the east window after midnight. Sometimes, I'd catch Mrs. Hargrove watching me with a sad sort of pride, as if she knew I'd crossed a threshold that couldn't be uncrossed. Mr. Hargrove grew quieter, his eyes always scanning the horizon, his hands never far from the old iron key that locked the cellar. We spoke little of what had happened, but the silence between us was heavy with shared understanding. We were survivors, bound together by the knowledge of what waited in the dark. One morning, a new car pulled up the gravel drive. A young man stepped out, suitcase in hand, eyes wide with the same mix of hope and desperation I'd worn on my first day. The Hargroves greeted him with polite smiles, but I saw the worry flicker in their eyes. Over tea, I sat across from him at the kitchen table, the list of rules folded neatly between us. He laughed when he read them, just as I had, and I felt a pang of dread. I leaned in, my voice low and steady. You need to take these seriously. I know how it sounds, but the rules are the only thing keeping you safe here. Don't test them. Don't try to be brave. Just follow them, no matter what. He nodded, but I saw the doubt in his eyes. I wanted to shake him, to make him understand, but I knew the truth. Belief only comes after the first close call, after you've heard the voices or seen the shadows move. I could only hope he'd remember my warning when it mattered most. Nights at the farmhouse never got easier. The fear changed shape, settling into a constant, low hum beneath the surface of every evening. I learned to live with it, to let it sharpen my senses instead of dulling them. I became the watcher, the keeper of the rules, the one who made sure no one slipped. Sometimes, I'd hear the wind whisper through the fields, carrying voices that weren't quite human, laughter that didn't belong. I'd grip the silver bell in my pocket and remind myself that dawn always comes, that the darkness can't last forever. But I know better now. The danger is never truly gone. It waits, patient and hungry, for someone to forget, for someone to break the chain of vigilance. The rules are a barrier, but they're only as strong as the people who follow them. I've seen what happens when they're ignored. I'll never forget it. So if you ever find yourself at a lonely farmhouse, if someone hands you a list of rules and tells you to follow them after dark, listen. Don't let curiosity or kindness or pride get the better of you. The things that wait in the night don't care about your reasons. They only care that you slip, that you open a door, that you look when you shouldn't. Follow the rules, or you won't make it out. And if you do survive, you'll never be the same. You'll carry the rules with you, wherever you go, always listening for the wind chimes, always checking the locks, always wondering if the darkness you left behind is really as far away as you hope. Because out here, in the quiet places, the rules are all that stand between us and the things that wait just beyond the light.